Superannuation is every Australian's most important investment. The decisions you make now can have a large impact on when you can afford to retire and the lifestyle you'll enjoy when you do. There are so many companies to pick from for your super, but did you know that you can also manage it yourself? Edge Financial Services can help you take control of your super and plan for retirement with a self-managed super fund. There are many different ways for you to invest in your future. To find out more about investment strategies that will give you the edge in retirement, visit edge.net.au today.
Hey guys, Scott from Edge Specialist Advice Network. I hope you're all well. Hey, today I want to look at another chart and another installment of what the numbers say. Today I'm specifically looking at a figure from 2023, so it's obviously going to be a little bit out, but the percentages or the numbers of the US debt that's owed to people or corporations or other governments around the world, and who actually owns the US debt. Who does the US owe the money to? Who are they supposed to, in theory, repay at some stage? It's quite interesting. Now, again, the numbers are from 2023, so the debt looks a bit smaller than it actually is. But I just want to have a look at this chart. I want you guys to get the sense and the feel of why, probably in the last 4 years, you would have heard a couple of terms. One is fiat currency. So this, whatever the government calls money under their steam, they create currency over what we probably think is money. And really what it means in the sense that people are starting to become nervous about the resilience and the strength and whether this fiat system can keep continuing. And so what's been born out of that is a lot of commentary from a lot of very, very smart people talking about the anti-fiat trades. What's the anti-fiat trade? Things that hold value that could potentially be used as money that will in time hold the value more, so your purchasing power, than fiat currency, which is the plastic paper notes that your government prints. Every note costs maybe, I don't know, 5 cents, and it could be worth $100. Good deal if you're selling that, right? So what are generally the anti-fiat trades that, when we hear that phrase, what is most people talking about? Gold, which is the original money from almost the start of time. Silver, yes, it's a smaller version of a monetary metal because it's also a heavy industrial metal. Maybe platinum, but I wouldn't even really call platinum a monetary metal. It's a precious metal. It's too scarce. But you also are now hearing what people are saying is the modern version of gold, the digital gold, which is Bitcoin. Now, I'm not here on this chart to talk about whether Bitcoin over gold, which is better. My personal opinion is you probably should start having both. Look, you should have been always having gold. We've been talking about gold for a long time. Bitcoin, we've probably sat on the fence for a long time waiting to see whether it was actually going to be really an adoption. It looks like there is going to be an adoption across some of the bigger countries for a number of reasons. And the actual reason is potentially that they are hedging against a fiat collapse. So it's the government's own anti-fiat trade betting against their fiat currency if they decide to hold Bitcoin as a reserve. So let's just have a look at this. The reason I want us to look at this graph is why people are talking about an anti-fiat trade. What are they scared of? What could happen? How stable is the fiat currency system? So let's get into it. Okay. Let's have a look at this graph. This graph is brought by Voronoi. They do some excellent stuff. Guys, it's a free link if you want to get in and you can get a report from these guys every day. Some of them are amazing. Some of them are great. You might not have time to look at them all the time, but they really, pictures tell a 1,000-word story, like we say. So let's have a look at this. Who holds the US debt? So who does the US government owe money to? Okay, first off the bat, the Federal Reserve System. So how does that work? So the Federal Reserve, whose shareholders are the biggest banks in America, because it's a private company, it's not owned by the government. It has some political leanings, as it probably should. They get to create the money and then lend it to the government, okay, effectively. So they are owed $5.2 trillion. So 15% of all the money that the US citizens owe, because governments don't have any money, they can only tax the citizens, is owed to the Federal Reserve Bank, which only exists to keep the system stable. So the Federal Reserve is owed $5.2 trillion from the US taxpayer for the privilege of the last 100 years, keeping the monetary system stable and keeping inflation at whatever they're supposed to keep it at. So in my mind, you should have deflation really, but it's not the system that they want to work on. All right, so take that what you will, right? Mutual funds. So imagine you've got the Goldman Sachs conservative fund. And they go, what is it? Oh, it's 50% shares. That's 50% bonds. What does that mean? Oh, we lend money to the US government and we try and get 3 to 5%, depending on whether it's like, it's a 2-year bond or it's a 3-year bond, or then we lend it to the government for 4 years, 5 years, whatever. The US government, it's the safest government around. So they promise that they'll pay us the interest, and then at the end they'll pay us the money back. All right. So mutual funds. So where would mutual funds that are conservative like that generally be held? Inside a pension fund, or what we call in Australia a superannuation fund, right? So a 401k in the American system. So they're lending money to the US government. The US government owes them a lot of money, so 11%. So almost $4 trillion is owed to mostly pension funds. Depository institutions. Okay, banks. Banks have to hold tier 1 capital. So what does that mean? Well, they don't have to have old Mrs. Jones putting a $250,000 term deposit in there, then they can lend out, $2.5 million. They don't have to do that. The banks can actually get a US Treasury bond, lend money to the US government. The government says we'll owe you this much money. Then they can lend out 10 times that into the environment, create more money. So banks really create the money, right? And the Federal Reserve is owned by the banks. So that's that little bit of incestuousness. So, the financial institutions, depository institutions, so savings and loans, banks, about 5% is owed to them. Down here, this is interesting as well, right? State and local governments. State and local governments have lent money to the federal government. And you go, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. Why is that? I don't know why. Obviously, that is due to their constitution, and maybe that provides services and that cost or something. But where does the state and local governments get that 5%? They have to tax their citizens, probably state tax, land taxes, estate taxes, that, or what we call in Australia GST. So again, the citizens of states and local governments get taxed, and the state government lends it to the federal government and tries to get a 4% return or 3% return, or just tries to not lose some money. So again, tax comes back from the taxpayer. Now, comes back from the little taxpayer, goes up to the federal government. How does the federal government make the money to repay the debt? They got to tax the citizens again. So it's a bit of a bad deal, right? So borrowing more than you make, or treating your country like a huge credit card. The citizens who pay tax are the ultimate losers. Fully lose, right? Let's have a look in the middle here. 17% US holders of savings bonds. So in the US, there is a greater inclination to hold bonds, so savings bonds with the US government. It's very much in Japan as well, and some other Asian countries. In Australia, we tend to do a little bit differently. We would probably have like a share portfolio, a managed fund. Which might have a little bit of bonds in it, but generally we wouldn't hold directly over the counter, $100,000 bond with the US state government or the US government. Whereas US holders of savings bonds do. Pension funds, again, so direct pension funds, insurance companies holding capital so that they've got assets that they can quickly cash in if they've got to pay out a lot of claims. Think of the Californian fires at the moment. 250 billion plus is what is the damage. I'm not sure how much the insurance companies are going to pay there. What they'll have to do is, and this could be a black swan event to trigger a crisis. The way that they're going to have to pay those claims out is they're going to cash in their bonds. Basically, they're going to sell the bonds to someone else. The US government won't say, "Oh, we'll give the money back early. We understand you need the money." They'll go, "No, go and sell it to Japan or a Singaporean pension fund. Put it up on the marketplace, and you just take what you got to get for it. If you lose money, nothing to do with us. It's an open trading vehicle. So we know you got to get the cash back to pay out for everyone's mansions that got burned down. That might make a flood of, or it might make an elevated amount of US Treasury bonds that are in the marketplace, all trying to be sold into fiat currency to liquidate, to put out into the general public and pay for obligations called insurance claims. Okay, intragovernmental debt that the US government owes to its own agencies. So the US government agencies at some stage have been able to get borrowings, and with those borrowings, they lend it to the US government and take an IOU called a bond. So imagine the teachers union or something, or the teachers department, or maybe some sort of health department or department of transport or something like that, collects money from, like, I'm guessing from fines via reports and registrations of vehicles and things, and they then park the money into a US Treasury. So they lend money to the US federal government and get this IOU. And you go, what's the IOUs for, Scott? Well, maybe they've got to hold an IOU because they've got so many long-term employees that when they get made redundant or when they go on long service leave, they've got to have some liquid cash in there to pay the wages. Right? They've got debt obligations to this big government payroll they've got to pay. Okay, so that's and how they get the money, not from the government employees. You got to go out and tax the general public to get money into that department. They park it with the US federal government. who promises to pay them back, and then at some stage you have to cash it in again. So let's have a look. Let's have a look at it. So this was down here. This was 2023. We're now into 2025. This figure is about 37 trillion, maybe about $37.5 trillion. It's going up by about $1 trillion every 3 to 4 months. The stuff in red is where it's owed from, where the money is owed to other countries that are outside the US. So you can see Japan has bought a lot, and some of that is by coercion because they're protected militarily from the US. Other countries, 15%, so Australia would be in that. UK, 2%, China, 2%, which is interesting, or a bit more than 2%. International, 7.9 trillion. So international funds, international hedge funds and things like that. So if we look at the blue compared to the red in size, so the US federal government owes really most of it to the banking system called the Fed, who is allowed to create the money and create a loan. Right? That's the first thing that is mind-blowing. When people start to realize that, you see why it makes you feel a bit sick in the stomach. You're like, I don't get it. But then at a state level or even a county level, those government institutions have taken money off the taxpayer, paid it to the federal government, so the federal government can go and do whatever they want with it. Misadventures around the world, perhaps, sort of crazy stuff that they do. And at some stage, it's owed back. And you can understand why people will go and they say, wow, the US government, out of the in this instance, $35 trillion that it owes to people around the world, most of that is to itself in some fashion, or some institution, or some pension fund that's inside the US perimeters, inside the actual national system. And that's what people go, look, is this system at its end? And there is a lot of smart people that say it is. And if you look at what the definition of a Ponzi scheme is, this is it. This really is it, So the bad thing, or the hard thing for people to kind of understand is, if I take an Apple bond, let's say I lend Apple $1 million and they give me 4% over 10 years, right? 4%, 4%, 4%. Yeah, at the end of that 10 years, I'm supposed to get my $1 million back. I won't be able to buy $1 million of goods and services that I did at the start, but it was a safe place to go at 4% a year, okay. I could also do that with the US federal government, 4% a year, 10 years, okay. In theory, they'll give me the money back. If either of those defaulted, here's what happens. If Apple defaults and says, oh, we're not going to pay any of our bondholders, bondholders have an actual recourse to the assets of Apple. They are allowed to sell the assets, all the shares, all the factories, all the stock, to be made whole, or at least part thereof, under a bit of an insolvency style agreement. So if you lend money to a company and they default because they can't repay the debt, you've got a legal recourse to be repaid. It might take 4 years to 5 years, but you'll get something back. If the government defaults, you won't get one penny. They just go, look, there was some monsoons, or we had to go to war, or some aliens invaded, or there was a pandemic. We're restarting the system again, because we restart every 50 years or so. So, our bad. We promise next time, whole new system. We promise we won't do it again. So, we're still good, right? We're still solid. This is why the anti-fiat, which is this system, trade for insurance and protection of your wealth and your purchasing power, excuse me, has been getting such a big push in the last few years, realistically, probably from 2019, because most people wouldn't know that in 2019, around about August, the actual banking system froze. Very similar to the GFC. It froze up. There's a big flurry of panic. Interbank debts weren't getting paid. Banks were starting to not lend to each other. So the merry-go-round that is this system, this situation, came to a grinding halt. Thank God the pandemic came around, because it gave all the banking institutions and the general public accepted that, okay, we're going to have to flood the world with money. We need to create about an extra 40% of money that's in the system now, just to kind of kick the can down the road, because not our fault. Hey, nothing we did. Look over there. The system wasn't freezing up. It's actually because we're going to shut the whole world. Sorry, we're going to shut the private sector down for 2 years. No one's been working, so we're going to create this new money, and the banking system will get greased up again, and off we go again. So thank goodness the pandemic came along and stopped the banking system collapsing. What are the fortunate odds of that? It always seems some crisis always comes along right at the right time, where the citizens will accept that the monetary system has to get another jolt, and there'll be inflation and consequences down the road, and the rich will get richer, the poor won't, but they'll accept it because it's better than the alternative, which is, I don't know, catching the flu and grandma dying, or not being able to rebuild after a war, or not building a space force so we can fend off the Martian attack, whatever it is. whatever it is. So this is why the system looks so brittle. Out of everyone that the US government owes money to, it's actually to a lot of the internal institutions and counties and states and citizens that are in there that are supposed to pay the tax they're the ones supposed to pay the tax to get to the federal government so they can repay the debts to themselves. And once that stops, and once people go, oh, we're tapped out, then they're tapped out. All right, guys, look, I know this is a little bit heavy, and if there's one thing I want you to take away from this is the circle and the cycle of what this is. It's finally unsustainable. They're going to try and do a couple of different things to keep this going. One of the things that I think they're going to try and do, and I talked about this a little bit the other day, was that if they pump up crypto, and every crypto exchange needs to buy US treasuries, so on that chart, they go into the red section, like Coinbase or Binance, go into that red section. They've got to go out and buy $1 billion worth of treasuries. If people around the world have got $1 billion worth of crypto, and all the different cryptos, and Bitcoin and USD and USDT, USDC, Ripple, XLM, all those sort of guys, like the rules are, the exchanges have got to have the money to liquidate the people as they come out. That's fair. If I wanted to sell my crypto and into cash, into Australian dollars, then I expect Coinbase to pay me. Okay? I don't expect Coinbase to go, look, we're out of money. The price will have it next week. So for them to have the money, they have to buy US treasuries because it has to come in through what they call USDC. So the more treasury bonds they need to be sold, you can either go out and beg the marketplace for it and have to offer a higher interest rate. Maybe you've got to offer 6. Everyone's got a home loan service. Or maybe go, look, what if we somehow doubled the value of Bitcoin? And then that means the exchanges would have to have kind of double the US treasuries. That means they have forced to buy out, lend us more money. And we'll just keep rolling it over and we'll just keep sorting it out. School of thought that's coming through. I'm not suggesting for one instance that Bitcoin is where I would store all my wealth. I see Bitcoin as an asymmetric pair. I see gold and silver and real estate as much better stores of wealth for me to sleep at night. Bitcoin has face-ripping volatility, but I think they're going to use that system to introduce a new electronic system so they can default all those debts, and somehow it manages to get everyone kind of okay with it. We get used to seeing it. You will start to see some banks in the US are now going to house your crypto just like they are Coinbase, right? So the banks are starting to find another outlet for money. They've found another way to make money. They don't want to own the crypto. What they want is an income stream, clipping the ticket every time you want to do something, which is far removed from the dinosaur banks of Australia who actually won't even let you transfer your money to your crypto account. Whereas JP Morgan and all those sort of guys, Bank of America, you're going to be able to open a crypto holding wallet inside there. That was this year, 2025. 2025. Some are already doing it with this, but it'll get the US blessing, and there'll be a race for it. And so if there's a race for Bitcoin, and it punches it up, and everyone's going to hold more US treasuries, well, the US just might be able to keep refinancing their debt. Either way, it's a massive Ponzi scheme, and you can understand why people are very, very nervous. You can understand why this phrase called the anti-fiat trade exists. And you can understand why people are looking at hard assets, which we've been talking about for a long time. Inflation. This whole thing is super inflationary. Hard assets, gold, silver, real estate, and Bitcoin is kind of going to get a manipulated view on that. That's quasi-establishment, quasi-empire, and quasi-everyone else. So it's a bit of a hedge. So I'm not saying you shouldn't have any. You probably should have some because it might be used in all sorts of ways in the future. It might even be used for lending collateral, which I think could be quite interesting. Guys, look, that's what the numbers say. When the US owes $38 trillion worth of debt, most of it's to itself, and so the citizens of the US are supposed to pay their little counties and states and pension funds and that, who are then supposed to get taxed for the US government to then pay it back to themselves when they want to cash that out. Yeah, I know. This is you can understand why some people are hiding under rocks, right? All right, that's enough from me, guys. Remember, life is a family sport. Give yours an edge. See ya.
John's home-based tradie business has outgrown his garage. With work starting to pick up, John wants to take on an apprentice, upgrade the work ute, and move to an industrial shed. It was hard for John to get a loan because he has inconsistent income. John saw Toowoomba's Edge Lending, the business lending experts. Edge Lending was able to secure a loan to help grow his business by tapping into the equity in his home. Edge Lending Solutions, helping small businesses to grow.